10 years from now, I don't think I'm going to remember P&Ls and margins and balance sheets. But what I will remember is watching the team around me both lift sort of themselves and me and watch us accomplish things that I don't think we would have on our own. There is like an intense joy in seeing people accomplish things that they didn't think that they could or were skeptical of.
You're listening to What Fuels You, where we deep dive with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business leaders to learn more about their stories and uncover nuggets of wisdom we can all use. I'm your host, Shauna Swerland, CEO of Fuel Talent, an award-winning recruiting firm based in Seattle. Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is Emily Pesce. Emily is CEO of Joon, whose mission is to make mental health care and well-being broadly accessible and effective for 13 to 24-year-olds. Emily has over 20 years of experience across healthcare, e-commerce, grocery, supply chain, technology, mobile, and cloud computing. Her primary operating experiences were at Amazon and Nerdy. Emily has also been an investor, providing early-stage capital, sometimes the first money in, to over 30 companies. Emily graduated from Duke University with a BA in public policy, a minor in computer science, and a certificate in genetics. She received her MBA from the NYU Stern School of Business with a concentration in entrepreneurship and innovation. Welcome, Emily. Great to see you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I'm so happy. I like the minute that I met you, I'm like, I need to have her on my podcast. And it's been a while, so I need a proper update. But before we do that, I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire. I give you kind of easy ones, I think.
Thank you.
Are you more of a night owl or early bird?
Uh, Not more of, I'm entirely a night owl. So I could stay up till 2 a.m. happily focused on whatever it is I need to be focused on. Try to get me doing something at 6 or 7 a.m. and it's a big problem.
Yeah. Well, are you productive at those hours, or you're more just like you get energy at night?
Incredibly productive. I find myself most productive at those hours.
Wow. I love that. Okay. Now I know I'm gonna like text you at 1 a.m.
Yeah,
Like,
that's the
oh
time.
crap, I should probably not have told her. What is the best music for you to listen to if you're trying to get like in a good mood or hyped up?
I, well, I should say I played in a band here in Seattle for a while. So I should have a better answer to this question than I do. But I kind of go back to the music I've been listening to for many, many years. So I love Weezer. I love Blink 182. And then I like to qualify as I've been listening to Taylor Swift since the beginning. So like the kind of insanity that exists today around her is wonderful. But I listen to a lot of Taylor Swift and some of her earlier, like more country albums, I find I just resonate with times in my life where I find them incredibly energizing. I like music where there's kind of like the singer-songwriter type piece to it, and you find that a lot in the Taylor Swift stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, she's an incredible artist and icon. I mean, it's insane. Wait, so tell me more about this band. What instrument did you
I
play? Are you singing?
Guitar. It's a great story. When I moved to Seattle, I was working at Amazon, and Amazon at the time still is, I assume, a bunch of people who were very ambitious, and so a couple people who were on the team I was on had started to record some music together, and I heard it and I loved it. I was like, I love your music. I was constantly asking them to listen to it, and they said, we need a guitarist. And I literally said I played guitar in high school. And they're like, you're it. And I didn't expect them to say that. They sort of called my bluff. So I went to, there used to be a guitar center in South Lake Union. And I went and had to buy an electric guitar because I didn't own one at the time. And that was a very harrowing experience. If you've ever been in Guitar Center, it's really high pressure because there's these people who just sit there and play these like really complicated riffs. And so this guy, I saw a guitar I wanted. He put it down. He's like, "Why don't you play it?" And I'm like, "No, I'm good. I'll just buy it." And he's like, "No, play it. It's like a girlfriend or a boyfriend. You got to play it and feel it." I'm like,
Oh,
"You
God.
don't sell me that guitar right now. I'm leaving the store." So I bought a guitar and we started playing a lot of music together. We were named out like Pluto. Pluto had just gotten kicked out of the solar system, and naming a band is hard. But it was a female-led sort of pop rock type band, and we had just the best time. We wrote a lot of original music, made a couple CDs. um, opened for some really big bands, and just really had a great time. So did it for a number of years, and then they wanted to kind of be more serious and travel more up and down the West Coast, and I was pretty committed to what was going on at Amazon, so I sort of detached myself from it. But it was
That's a crazy story. I mean, you and at Amazon, it was like you did everything at Amazon. So I don't know how you balanced that all, but that's pretty
Well, it was,
badass.
I mean, it was just like an outlet I was a creative outlet.
Yeah.
And I didn't do it for this reason, but it gave me this gift, which was when you present something to the world, when you write a song and you play it and then you get on stage and then play it live, it's a really vulnerable moment. And there's nights where people are going wild and really enjoying it. And there's other nights where like this that it empty. You're like literally playing for nobody. And I learned a lot about the vulnerability and power of like art and putting yourself out there through what we were doing in the band. And it just gave me such a respect for people who put things into the world, because when you put stuff into the world, the one guarantee is there will be people who don't like it. In fact, most people may not like it, but it's you. And that is, it can be really emotional. So that, when I look back at that time, that was like, that was a gift to kind of learn that and be in that experience. And it made me so cherish the moments that were incredibly energetic and then learn a lot from those that weren't. So, um, I, I don't, again, it's a lot of years since then. And but the thing about Amazon that I think was unique and special was the people that were there. It just, everybody got lifted. There was just so much ambition and curiosity, and there weren't barriers. Like, want to start a band? Yeah, let's do it. I'll go to Guitar Center and buy a guitar and let's go play music and let's do like it.
I need to see pictures. That
Yeah,
is so awesome.
there's
I
music
didn't.
videos. So
Oh,
we'll,
okay. We,
yeah,
I'm gonna search those. You
I
gotta
know.
send, or you gotta just send them to me. So is there a person when you think about like, gosh, I just wish I had access to them or that they were still alive, like that you would love to spend an evening with or have lunch with?
I've heard you ask this question to others, and when you did it, I created anxiety because I don't have a good answer to that question. My answer, I think, is I just like being around people. And I think when you're around enough people, especially those who don't come from a background like yours or different, what you find is you're surprised by the weight of their experiences. Like they don't necessarily need to be somebody who is famous or accomplished a lot in their life. When they share their life story, like you so bring to light in this podcast from others, you just hear incredible stuff. And so to me, that's the power of diversity. Is it's not about filling a quota of any sort. It's about bringing together diverse and disparate experiences and sort of finding the best in the thing you're attempting out of all of those disparate experiences. And there's sort of their own unique put together way. And so I think the way I would answer when I was thinking about it and heard you ask it to others was, I think the answer is trying to find time to listen to others
Mm,
and like that's the who would I it's more like don't be regretful I didn't find enough time to hear stories from those around me, is kind of the way I think I would answer it. And
that's a
don't and
great
allow it to
lesson.
be, yeah, like allow it to be the person um whose parents work at a 7-Eleven and who then goes on to found a brand that creates experiences for women, and parlors and products like one of your previous guests who was amazing.
Yes. Yeah,
But that's
Jane
like you
Park.
never know what story you'll hear, and so I hope that wasn't a letdown, but
No,
um
not at all.
yeah,
Because I've been asked it too, and it's tough. But could have been like a relative to like ask about your heritage or something. Like sometimes it's for me, my grandma, who like I was just like 7 when she passed away. And so sometimes it's like I want to ask questions of
yeah.
her. But what are your or what is your one or maybe you have more than one pet peeve?
Oh, pet peeves. I have maybe too many of them. All right, I've got a productive one. My New Year's resolution this year was a pet peeve I think I was doing too. So I thought about, I think we all need to have fewer opinions. I there's like there's too much going on in the world, and a lot of it is really deeply complex. And
Yeah.
because of the internet, we're exposed to all of it. And so we tend to have opinions about all of it. Little things, big things, it doesn't matter. And
Yeah.
I started to feel like I was having opinions on things that like A, they weren't really impacting me personally, but B, I didn't really know what I was talking about. And it's a slippery slope because you want to. They're in the news or they're on the website or you're seeing somebody in social media talking about them. So I would point that at sort of a mirror that I'm looking into myself and say, have fewer opinions about things that don't matter to you or you don't know much about, and stick to the things that you do because there's so much to say about those.
I can
So I guess I would
appreciate
also
that.
say when I hear others spouting on about something they clearly know nothing about, especially when it's something that I do, that's a little bit of a pet peeve. I also, for whatever reason, really hate gum chewing. It's just so strange. It's like this piece of rubber you put in your mouth that never dissolves. Like there's something about it that I don't understand in my brain as like a thing, and it just like causes me
Emily, that is so funny. Who
dissonance.
was I just? Oh, I was just at a girls' weekend over the weekend, and one of my friends I was with hates gum chewing, and I love to chew gum. And I don't only chew the rubber thing that has nowhere to go. I like blow bubbles, and I snap it, and I do all the things that are like very tacky. But I really like gum. So sorry, not sorry. Next, when I'm with you, I won't chew gum. It
Yeah,
is
no,
funny.
we should torture each other
That's
with that
so
one.
funny. She was like, oh God. Okay, is there a bucket list vacation that you would want to take when you're not like building a business and raising kids?
I have a 5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, and I'd give a general answer to this question too, which is their personalities are emerging and their curiosity is emerging. I think one of the things we lose as adults is curiosity. And when you have really young kids, what you see is what it's like to be curious as a native thing instead of curious as like a effort. And what curiosity does is it makes relatively mundane things actually super interesting. And so we haven't really done any big trips with the kids. We've traveled to certain place, that's we've gone to visit my parents and whatever. So I'm just really looking forward to traveling with them and watching them explore and interact with the world and just see how they perceive it and what reactions they have to it. I think it will kind of be a new shine on a lot of experiences that I've had in my life. We haven't done much camping as a family, so maybe a very specific answer is this spring and summer. As we're recording this, we're heading into spring and summer. I've sort of wanted to get into a tent with the kids, which may maybe set us up for like go from Vancouver down to California at some point and camp
Yeah.
along the way with the kids. I think that would be a really incredible trip given the geographic diversity and beauty of the West Coast.
Oh, for sure. It's so crazy because I always thought I would do that type of stuff more with the kids, but I'm not a great camper. All right. I would want to go with someone who really knows what they're doing. Okay. So are you an introvert or an extrovert?
So this is one of those things where I think I have an opinion that's informed, but maybe I don't. I was it Myers-Briggs. I took something and I think what it said, I'm an off the charts extrovert, which I always just
That's what
thought
I
meant,
thought. Because sometimes I'll say that and then I get it wrong. And the person's like, I'm a introvert, faking an extrovert up because I
well,
need to. But
this is where it gets
you read as a
complicated.
total extrovert.
And I think everybody who sees me would think that. But what I heard was introversion, extroversion is more about where you get your energy.
Yeah, it is.
And so it's not where you deploy your energy. So I'm an
No.
extrovert by deploying energy. That's what people see. I
Mm.
totally recharge in quiet moments. So I lived in New York
Oh,
City and I would never move back to New York City despite my love for the food and the subway and getting around and the culture. Like my issue with New York City was I could never find enough peace and quiet to recharge. And so
oh,
I think one of the reasons
interesting.
I'm really productive in the evening, as you had asked earlier, is it is a quieter moment. It's a peaceful moment. There's not as much going on, and it just allows me to sort of both gain energy and then pour it back out into the world. So I don't know what that makes me, but I love being in social situations, but I recharge in quiet ones.
I'm curious. So you talked about New York. I know you've lived like lots of places, but like where did you grow up?
I grew up in New Jersey. My when I was really young in southern New Jersey, right by Philadelphia, and then in fourth grade moved to North Jersey near New York. My dad
And what were you
had
into like when
shifted
you were
jobs.
little?
Um, what I mean at that time it was about running around outside and playing manhunt and riding bikes and rollerblades became big. I just remember rollerblading all the time, everywhere. There was no internet. Like I grew up in a phoneless childhood, right? When you called your friend, it was often busy. And I had a friend Bill who Billy when we were kids, his parents would just take the phone off the hook to not be disturbed. Like you couldn't get through to Billy. You had no idea what was going on. So to go to movies, we would have to go look in the newspaper for the times and then, hope everybody showed up at the right time at the mall. And if they didn't, you just kind of wanted the movie and hope that they were alive. So it's just a different, I think it was a different time where it felt like a lot of our exploration with the world happened in the world instead of in a screen, and I guess that's what I would remember most about it.
Hmm.
Um, I
And you would
loved
call
playing
it like
sports.
broadly, like a happy childhood. It sounds like a little more suburban.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was suburban, so it was a suburb of New York City. Uh, we lived on a cul-de-sac, so like the rollerblading was always on a cul-de-sac. We were gonna get mowed down by cars.
Yeah. Sounds super similar to my childhood. It was just like literally running around with all the other kids in the neighborhood and biking and trading stickers and just crazy,
Totally.
Yeah. Oh, it was, and
We had
my
we had the,
kids
we had the
always say
neighborhood. We
they
called
miss it.
ourselves the Spy Patrol kids, and we'd go around and we'd monitor the neighborhood for suspicious behavior or other such things.
I
So
love
we
that. And
had.
are you a sibling or are you an only
Yeah, I have a
child?
younger sister. And so she's a 2.5 years younger than me. And I'd say we are, not that you asked this, but like as it relates to growing up, we're close, but we're never like best friends close, like you see with some siblings. So uh, we kind of, and we were like, I was a senior in college when she was a freshman. So we were just far enough apart where we were like not close enough to hang out all the time. But
Mm,
she's still on the East Coast. Obviously see her and talk to her often.
yeah.
But I'd say her childhood was very much the same.
I mean, you're
We did
obviously
have
a good student because you went to Duke.
uh,
So you were into
yeah.
sports and then school, was that like a natural thing? Like some kids it just kind of rolls and others like they just work their asses off. Like where were
For
you on the
me
whole school
it
thing?
was easy. Like I just um I loved I loved school, and it was set up in a way that worked well natively for me.
Mm,
And so, I loved when teachers would say, like I loved hearing about parent teacher conferences because I always
yeah.
wanted to be the best, right? Like the best behaved or whatever. I had this need to to win. Like it was a competition to me almost in some
Yeah.
ways, and
I
I didn't get
totally get
freaked out.
that.
Yeah, so I school for me was great. I was
Hmm.
engaged. I was lucky enough to be around teachers who were invested in me, and a family who was invested in me and invested in my
Yeah.
education. And um uh
And your mom was a teacher, right?
she yeah and she focused on special ed students, so she was really understood the value of when adults pour energy into kids sort of learning and growing, and especially
Totally.
in cases where extra energy is needed. And my dad, in his work, he worked at companies which almost always were publishers. There was like a lot of the consumption of his work was teaching and learning. And so
Mm,
there was a really, and both my parents are first generation college students. My uh and their families were immigrants. My dad's father was effectively an illiterate plumber. Uh, my mom's dad, who I never met, who died well before I was born, I think my mom was 12 or 13. He was actually super gifted. He worked at this place called Bell Labs, which was this almost like Silicon Valley type like they put this first satellite or over Earth and such. But he passed, and my grandma remarried another Irish immigrant who had a similar sort of no college, no nothing background. So uh, I think they all, especially my grandparents, they work their butts off um, to make a life for us. And what they understood in that generation was that education was a differentiating factor to agency over your life. If you could go to school, get through high school, get through college, you controlled your story, which is not
hmm.
what they had. And so they made many sacrifices in what they had to do in their lives, the work that they engaged in, breaking their backs, doing hard work that was deeply like manual labor focused and such. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think that's why my parents poured such energy into Kate. Katie's my sister, to our education.
Hmm.
Finding us great neighborhoods to grow up in with great schools, and so on and so forth. And
And
I know it's been
clearly,
tough for
and
my parents
yeah.
when I went to Duke. To like that was a generation of Irish and Italian immigrants who like literally lived on top of each other in generations. Like grandma was in the basement, and like your brother and you, and like the communities were all tight, and to have a kid go to college in a different state was like a totally new idea. And so I'm really grateful that they, you know, and I'm sure it was hard for them, right? And
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
grateful that
and
they
Duke is now, I mean, it's like an incredible school. I know you studied public policy and computer science. Like you were thinking about these things. I'm curious what you had in your mind as far as A, how did you choose Duke? And then also once you got there, I mean, I literally was choosing like, oh, that building's closest to where I'm living, and that looks like a fun major. I'll just like walk over there. I was not deeply thinking like the kids are today. I've got, a college kid and one about to go to college. And so they're in that headspace of like, what's my 3, 5, 10-year plan? Were you like that? Or how did Duke happen and how did you choose your majors?
Duke, my parents who had to have been very patient because I used to go around telling people I'm low maintenance, and at some point somebody was
Hmm.
like, "Nobody who's low maintenance says they're low maintenance. Only the worst version of a high maintenance person says that." So I think
Yeah.
I was an intense kid, and my parents got in a car and we drove to a bunch of college campuses, and kind of set foot on them. And I don't know any other way to describe it than like certain campuses resonate and certain don't. And that was just my
Totally.
experience. Like I would step out into it, and I was like, "This feels good or not." And Duke was the one that when I got out of that car and just got on that campus, I was like, holy moly, I have to be at this place. I couldn't
Yeah.
tell you why. But that was the feeling I had when I got there. And I applied early, I got deferred, which was so disappointing. And then I had to do like 11 other applications, which stunk. But I kept writing them a letter every week telling them, what had happened in that week. Like I, took this test, I did well, or the sports team did this or whatever. And, they eventually, I either annoyed them to death or I accomplished enough to satisfy their doubts and they let me in. When I got there, I think I have more of a story than like yours than others. I didn't know what I wanted to do. For me, college was evolving as a human, getting to know other people, seeing, like we said earlier, other stories, other backgrounds. Like grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, upper middle class. Like my lived experiences were very siloed. And so it was a place where for the first time I got to be around people who weren't like me in many ways. And I think that's what's carried forward from Duke. I couldn't tell you the very specific things I learned in the
Hmm.
areas that I focused, but I was a right public policy major. I did a certificate in genetics, which was like a program they were turning into a major but didn't have it yet. So basically, a dual major in public policy and genetics and a minor in computer science, and that basically made me I created the optionality that I could be pre-law, pre-business, or pre-med. So I
Yeah,
did
I
not have
like
anything
love
figured
it.
out. I was just
I
like, well,
love
let's
it.
not rule things out. I took the LSAT. I was like, not for me. And then we could talk about what I did early in my career, but just trying to keep
Yeah,
options
no,
open and
I would
learn.
love to know a little bit more about that part of the journey, like just coming out of school. So many kids I know right now are graduating college, some have jobs, some don't. And it's like, did you go through the on-campus recruiting process or what was your very first job out of school?
I worked at a company called AMS, American Management Systems. They were bought by CGI not long thereafter. It became CGI AMS, and now I think it's just CGI. It was basically a consultancy, an IT consultancy, and the group I was part of was their healthcare group. And so the
Mm,
team was building patient record systems, basically the medical record side and the billing side. And this was back in like late 90s, early 2000s when there was just an enormous amount of real estate in hospitals with paper records, and paper records have all the downside of taking space and they can get lost, blah blah blah. And so there was a modernization effort of turning them into digital records. And so the team that I was hired on to was working on that problem. um, and I would say it was like a nondescript job. Like there's nothing that was, I didn't go to Goldman and I guess that would be my advice to kid. Like, first of all, you're a kid and enjoy it, and don't let the pressures of the world attack you too early with like all the anxiety of what you're going to be in life. It's just too much, and there's plenty of that down the road. So, you know, I think the thing to have is experiences, because experiences teach you what you like and what you don't. It's really hard to intuit that in a vacuum. And experiences can be garnered at any job, anywhere. You don't have
a
to be
hundred
only,
percent.
yeah. So like there's a pretty famous Obama quote where somebody asks him like, "What do you want in a somebody who works for you or in the government or whatever?" And he's like, "If people can just see a problem and lean into it and attack it, like even if they don't get it right." that's to me the best input. Like that's the person I value the most. That fungible, curious, driven individual. And they may get through to the other side of that problem and say, you know what, that's not for me. Or that may become their life's work. But like they attacked it. And I love that
Hmm.
proactivity. So I think the main thing with kids getting out of college, or where I was, at least when I was leaving college, was just go do something
Yeah.
and see whether you like it or not, and then go from there.
And did you like it? I mean, I know you went and got an MBA, but did you
I did
like
well.
that?
Yeah, I mean, it was fine, I guess I would say. I got an MBA in the like my dad got an MBA, so I got an MBA. Like it just seemed
Yeah.
like the thing to do more than I think it was like part of a formula I felt deeply convicted about. And the MBA, if people ask me today, would you do it again? I don't know, probably. It was more about the people than it was about what I learned there. And in fact, I think if you want to be an entrepreneur or you have ambitions about changing the world, sometimes getting an MBA, I think, could be terrible because what it teaches you is all the reasons not to do something. Because startups make no sense financially at all, ever, and they're only getting harder as competition grows. So, I I think at the end of the day, what's most important is human interactions. That's where everything
Yeah.
is. All companies are the same in at least one way. They're all just groups of humans. Now, maybe AI will have something to say about that in the near future,
Oh yeah,
but
we're definitely
but
going to cover that part.
this is this more than I do. It's just groups of people. And so what's the
Yeah.
best thing that you can do over your career is you can work with different groups and different types of people and learn how to work with different types of people and ask them questions about all kinds of things. Like it's so I used to say this at Amazon when we were recruiting people because kids would be so obsessed over the first role at Amazon. And I'm like, stop. The first role is irrelevant in it, the specificity of what you're doing. What is relevant is you come in and just attack it. And you won't
Hmm.
know what you're going to like or not like. But if you do well in that first role, all options are available thereafter. And by the time you get that all options are available, you'll know the organization and where you want
Yeah.
to go
And
work.
what
And
was yours? What was your first role?
so when after MBA and I came to Amazon, I was hired by Heidi and Ian onto the team that was founding and building Amazon Fresh, which was Amazon's first foray into non-shelf stable foods, basically grocery store food delivery. This was post the web van home grocer implosion after the sort of
Yeah.
initial tech bubble burst. And like many retailers at the time, Amazon understood the importance of the frequency of grocery delivery as part of an overall e-commerce strategy. And so, what we were doing was building the scrappiest, like lowest lift version of grocery delivery here in Seattle. Because what had happened to Webvan and Home Grocer is they had built these unbelievably fancy automated warehouses because effectively capital was free back in the sort of 2000 time frame, and when capital became unfree, they could not push enough volume through that automation to pay down all the costs of that automation. And so ours, we didn't bought, we leased an old warehouse that a grocery chain here at QFC had previously been using. It was like there was no automation, there was no nothing. It was made of wood, not even metal. And we just tried to see what the metrics of a grocery business looked like because as Amazonians, that wasn't something we were used to. It was a very different product than Amazon was used to selling. For instance, lettuce expiring on a shelf is very different than a book with no expiration ever sitting on a shelf. And
Totally.
and to explore whether the customer behaviors would be intriguing to the overall business as an input. Groceries are a famously low margin business. So like, why are we doing this? Why is it worth all the pain? And when could we see an increase in downstream, buying behavior for other things if people are buying groceries through Amazon Fresh? So um, it was an incredible job because it was, I was there really early and, our mandate was to go do it. And we all looked at each other and probably had no business doing it. We're like, we're going to figure this out. And we built a grocery store. So I remember one of the things that I had to do that it's kind of a fun story is we didn't have fresh sliced deli meats and cheeses, and like that's kind of a staple of a grocery store. And so like we got to do that. And so I had to go tell the fulfillment center system at Amazon that we were going to put a spinning saw in the fulfillment center. Now, if you're familiar with fulfillment center culture, it's all about safety, like not getting hurt,
Yeah.
OSHA. There's only certain people who can drive the forklift because that's super dangerous. So when
Yeah.
I pitched this idea that we're gonna have like this spinning blade at like a few thousand RPM, that like it was like a hilarious clash of cultures at Amazon. But we worked our way through all those things, and it was really fun to I mean, I helped write code for a lot of the replenishment systems. We pitched to Bezos updates. I drove trucks and picked and packed in the fulfillment center. It was really a full-on do everything top to bottom experience. And I think it was, I'm so incredibly grateful for that. And I was hooked at Amazon after that. I'm like, I could
Yeah, I
care
think
less
it's a
about
certain,
food.
how would you describe like a person who thrives at Amazon and like, um, obviously mixed feedback on the culture. I'm sure you've taken some nuggets that you love and brought them along the way and left some. What is your overall take on the culture and just kind of who is a successful Amazonian?
Well, first I did probably 600 or 700 interviews while I was at Amazon. I was a bar raiser. I got involved in the new hire orientation. Again, I've my whole professional life has been around this notion. I volunteered in the admissions office at Stern Business School. I was part of the FAC program, which was the program that welcomed freshmen on campus at Duke. I like to me, it's all about the people, and the most important part of that is as far upstream you can get and figuring out who those people are, how they're welcomed, or whatever. And so when you see the employment outcome distribution at most companies, what you see is a bell curve. It's like a fairly normal distribution with most people kind of in the middle, like it was fine. And then Amazon, there's no middle. It's just like two peaks on either end. And it's like literally the greatest time of my life, or I cried at my desk every day. And so at some point you have to reflect and say, why is that? And the best articulation I have of why that's true is because Amazon is a company where the culture is unavoidable. And Jeff worked really, really hard to make that a thing. Like culture didn't hang on the walls. It was how we worked and it was built into the process. Like customer obsession. We wrote fake press releases before we built products or features because we'd sit around a room and read the fake press release and be like, "But did anybody actually care about this?" So there was like mechanisms were put in place that reinforced the culture, so you couldn't avoid it. So the
Hmm.
bifurcated distribution, from my perspective, was always a flawed hiring process. We hired people who weren't actually cultural matches for the way Amazon worked. And so when they got to Amazon, none of their value and brilliance in the world was rewarded. But they effectively felt like they were in a meat grinder because the way they worked, which by the way, Amazon's way of working is not the only one, and it is a very specific way, you know, and I don't know whether it makes it right or wrong, but it doesn't work for certain people. And so, yeah, because it was an unforgiving culture and because it was so mechanized in the way Amazon worked, I think it felt miserable for those people because they never felt their value in that culture. And then
Hmm.
those that did work in the way Amazon wanted, it was like the most rewarding thing in the universe because what you poured out into the world got amplified and fed right back into you. And that was always my way of understanding what happened. So what do I think Amazon wanted? I think at the end of the day, I got removed from Amazon Fresh. And when I heard the news, I thought I had done something wrong. And I was like, I thought I was doing a good job. What did I do? And I was put into Kindle, which was this skyrocketing thing. And the answer I got was no, you didn't do anything wrong. At Amazon, we value fungible assets and people. We don't know what's coming next. If we have a bunch of people who only know how to build a grocery store, we're not very flexible in the future. So what we like to do is we like to take people and put them on totally different things. So in this case, it was going from selling, food with expiration that could be hours or days away to ebooks, which was like as different as it could get. And
Totally.
and so I think that's like I think aligning to the culture is a big input to Amazon. So if like somebody listening to this is considering a job at Amazon, if you can read those leadership principles and genuinely think of a bunch of examples of each one that you've demonstrated in your career, great sign. If you can't, no judgment. Don't go to Amazon. You're going to be miserable there. Like it's because
Yeah.
that's it. And then the second thing I would think is like you got to approach the world in a generalist way because at Amazon, I think they still think and should always. This is like it's always day one from Jeff's perspective, right? And I think Andy's kind of doing the same thing. Is the intent is to reinvent things that we don't even know we're going to reinvent. And in order to do that, we have to have a group of people who can tackle those things whenever they come up and however they come up. And the reality is, a bunch of people selling books have no business building AWS unless you've taken that bunch of people who are building books and pointed them all kinds of random stuff along the way to the point where when they see the AWS opportunity, they go, "We got this. We'll
Yeah.
give it a shot," and then tackle it. So
I've
I
had so many Amazon people on, and I just love the way that you're describing it. You were there for a ton of years,
like 7 or 8 years,
seven or
from
eight. Yeah. And then
2000s. Yeah.
what made you ultimately decide to leave? I know that you were, you've done a little of the startup thing and you were, working, doing
It's nothing.
investing. Like what
My
were you trying to
parents,
be like, hey, what do
my
I want to
parents,
be ultimately?
I miss my family. I was on the
Yeah.
West Coast and they were on the East Coast, and I care a lot about them, and I knew it was making them sad that I was here, and so I just said, you know what? Um, Again, I probably should disclose it. If you cut my arm open, like some orange blood may still pour out. But like Jeff had the whole regret minimization framework. Like when you're 80 or 90 and tired and laying in bed, like what will you regret not having tried? And I was like, I'll regret not having tried the East Coast again. I just got convinced of that because of how much I liked my family and wanted to be near them. And so
Hmm.
um we moved to, I couldn't do New York for the earlier introvert extrovert conversation. So we moved to DC just to
And
try it out.
who's we?
Gabby and I, so I was dating this born in the Seattle area, full on Seattle, like amazing Pacific Northwest girl, and so it's kind of an ask to say, hey, would you go try the East
Yeah.
Coast? And she's all about adventure. So she's like, yeah, like I'd love to try it. So we moved to DC because it was kind of close to New, it was like, a 3 hour, 3.5 hour drive to my parents or whatever. So close enough where we could visit spontaneously, but far enough away that like we
I'm
weren't living on
guessing you
top of each
never
other.
did go to New York.
No, we visited a lot, and they came down too.
Oh,
Um,
good.
but we both moved without jobs. So Gabby at the time was working at Zulily during its ascension, and it was just total chaos. I mean, talk about inventing
Yeah, they
as you're
were a client
going.
of mine. That was so fun. I helped them
Yeah,
build a lot. It was so fun.
yeah. I mean, it was Gabby was she was doing a ton of stuff. Anyway, so we moved to DC, and we neither of us had jobs. I left Amazon. I loved it. It was like I cried when I left. But I wanted to do it for this family thing. So when I got there, one of the best decisions I made in my life was Amazon's composition compensation was composed of a cash piece, which was fairly meager, and then well, they would grant you these RSUs. And I was like, I'm not going to sell the RSUs. I'm going to live off the cash. And I'd moved from New York City, remember, at business school. So Seattle was like so cheap. I'm like, this is
Oh,
amazing what
yeah,
you could get. Uh,
totally.
and so that turned out to be a great decision. So when I joined Amazon, it was like $30 per share. And it went up to $3,600, which is like exceeds a venture return for a public company. So when I moved to DC, I had some of that money, and I just started doing some angel investments. So I met up with some friends from business school who lived there, at bars or whatever. We'd hear about deals and we'd write a $25,000 check or a $50,000 check. And it
Yeah.
was intoxicating. It was awesome, mostly for me to see us be an input into enabling another person's dream. Like to see
Hmm.
that passion that they brought and then to be able to start to help them achieve what they wanted. It felt awesome. And by the way, my Amazon experience is way overvalued. Like people would see I worked at Amazon and like want to hear everything. I'm not sure I really know what's going on, but I was able to leverage that to sort of get exposure to deals and things. And so the angel investing became like I was doing so much of it. Rich, my partner and friend from business school, and I were like, we should professionalize this a little bit. So we built this thing, Working Lab Capital, which I called a venture firm, not a venture fund, because we never raised blind capital. We would go find deals, and then we started making friends with a bunch of high net worths and family offices, and we would just write an investment doc and share it with that group. And we would almost always fill whatever allocation we had from that audience. So we didn't raise a fund, so to speak, that we then drew capital from. We just went every time we had a deal and said, who would like to invest alongside us on
Yeah.
that? And it was super cool. And then Gabby, who had been doing buying and such things at Zulily, she pursued her dream, which was she opened a women's apparel store in Georgetown, which is a neighborhood in DC, if you're unfamiliar with DC. And, we did cool stuff. Like I remember we flew to Copenhagen for Fashion Week because she was really into these Danish brands and some of those brands, which she was the first store in the United States to offer them, like Samso and Gani or Gani, depending on what
Yeah.
perspective you have, are now everywhere. And it was like super cool to do that. And
She's got an
so
eye.
she does. I mean, she's got such a gift as it relates to that. Her real gift was running a store is intense work.
Yes.
But when I would go in that store, what she sold more than anything else was she sold confidence. So women would come in and they would just say, "What do you think will work?" And Gabby just had an eye for saying, for what you're telling me about your style, for your body type, for your vibe, this will work or whatever. And people, there was such I did an investment in a company called Everywhere, which didn't work out, but I learned just a lot about in Gabby's endeavor and watching those customers. Like, we place a lot of pressure on women and how they look in America, and there's almost an emotional attachment to feeling like you're buying things that give you confidence. More so
Yes.
for this may be a little bit of my trans experience, more so for women than for men. Not that it is impossible on either side, right, to have the
Hmm.
opposite.
Were you
And so,
into how you looked when you were living as a man?
no, I mean, I
Were
wouldn't.
you like dad? You know, like you like
No, I
see
was. It
guys
wasn't
and
like
you're like a
dad.
dad bod with like
It
a
wasn't. No,
baseball hat.
it wasn't dad. But like what I would do is I'd go to J. Crew at the beginning of the season and just buy one of everything. Like I didn't really
Yeah.
care. It was like fresh, clean clothes and it like
Yeah, it
looked
gets the
half put
job
together.
done.
Yeah, and Amazon, I wore jeans and a hoodie. Like
Yeah,
so,
that's the look.
I I learned. I didn't. It didn't matter to me that I looked anything other than presentable because I didn't understand at that time in my life how it could feel to look great because it was an
Mhm.
impossibility. And at that time, I didn't know I was trans yet because I hadn't seen enough trans people to realize it. And so I was just living like I was a pretty happy person. I think anybody who knew me back then was like, yeah, like
Mhm.
I was like, but once I realized this little piece of me that I hadn't figured out, it was a totally different thing. So like I take like it's fun to shop and find great things now. I
Oh, it's
kind of
I mean, I'm a
understand.
professional. I'll take you shopping anytime. I'm literally, my friends are always like, uh-oh, Shauna's the worst to shop with because I'm like how you're describing. I can find and see what would look good and the colors and I push people. It's very fun for me.
It was such joy to see Gabby because that's her. She loves pouring that energy to the world, and to see
Yeah.
other people respond to it is such a like a talk about customer obsession. It's such a beautiful thing to see. And
Yeah.
for me, one of the really kind, thoughtful gifts that I got from somebody after I had come out and was transitioning was they introduced me to a stylist at Nordstrom here in Seattle and said, I trust this person. I think she's wonderful. She's a safe place, and got me a gift certificate. And you can go into this area, it's private. They bring a bunch of clothes in, and then you can start to see how you look. And when you don't know how to shop for clothes or what works or what doesn't on your body or like that to me was such a deep and meaningful gift. The person who gave me that gift was somebody I'd met at Amazon, by the way.
Oh, I love that. I just am curious when you say I didn't know that I was trans, like what exactly that means and what was the moment where you started to realize it and what did that feel like for you?
I was walking my dog on a random day, nondescriptly, and it hit me like a lightning bolt. And in that moment, whatever confluence of lived experiences sort of arrived together in my brain at that moment, it just became absolutely clear that I was trans or I am trans. And like the way I described that moment was like in almost a flash, I kind of replayed my whole life with that understanding. And all the things that didn't make total sense were kind of a little bit like did all of a sudden.
What were those
And
things that didn't make sense?
and again, this is all just my experience and like these things independently like could be anybody's experience. You don't necessarily have to be trans, but collectively for me it was like, aha, I have this like memory, for instance, when I was a little kid, like kindergarten. I don't even know what May Day is. If you ask me today what the holiday May Day is, I could not tell you what it is about.
Oh, where you put
But
the things around the
I
thing? I don't think you're
I
allowed to do that anymore. It's like maybe not acceptable. I can't remember what
there's a
it's
thing called
for.
May Day. I don't and when I was a kid, like so in 1980s, we
Yeah.
celebrated it in the school I was in, and they made me put on tights. And I remember I could paint that day like out of my brain like it was yesterday. I don't have like wearing tights for me. It was like so I put that in high school. We were talking about music earlier. I played guitar in an Indigo Girls cover band with three other girls. They went to the all girls school. I was the first ever guy to play music at their talent show. And like I that was as much about me being in that space as it was about me playing music, right? Like it was just that was I didn't know it, but that was the space that I wanted to be in. And being with those girls was just such a gift and so amazing. I guess college is such a gendered experience. I was in a fraternity at college and, it was a fraternity that partied all the time or whatever. And I remember most of the time I spent in that fraternity was helping to shuttle girls out of there that was like a little too drunk and a little too late. Like I was just I think my empathy towards the lived experiences of girls wasn't empathy. It was just a
Mm,
deep desire to be living that way myself.
wow.
And at Amazon, I was the only male person involved in the Lean In circles, which became popular when, after Sheryl Sandberg wrote that book. When I was in DC, I was involved in meetings with the leaders of the Women's March.
Mm,
And I always for a long time I thought of myself as an ally, right? Like but what was really going on was I was so desperate to have that lived experience, that gendered
mm,
experience as we define it in society. And so at some point I had seen enough trans people, like when I was a kid in the 80s, the first openly gay person I met was in college. Not high
mm,
school, not middle school, college. The first trans, I didn't even know what trans was until I got to Seattle. I mean, it wasn't a
mm-hmm,
thing. Um, in the movies you might hear of like a she-male or something like in
mm-hmm.
the horribly stigmatized version of sex work, but that was like it. That was all that we knew about
Right.
that.
And so
And
you're on this walk, and is
in
it
like
a when you
it
have
all
this
just came
realization,
together.
is it a I'm gonna start crying, or is it a I can't wait to run home and like research this? Like what headspace were you in?
That was the other half. It was surety. It was like that's the missing piece, and then it was dread. I mean, uh Gabby and I
Because
were
you're married
married.
now at this
We're
point to
married,
Gabby.
like, yeah, we're working and having kids. I have this is the best way I can describe it is your identity, and you could apply this beyond gender, but like just for gender, it's like the best way I could say, Shauna, for you to imagine what it was like for me at that moment is imagine yourself standing in a field, and around you in that field are mirrors and they're all pointed at you. And as you turn around and look around, you see a reflection of yourself. Some of those mirrors are tall, sturdy mirrors that have been around for a long time, and some are new mirrors that maybe you just got put around you that don't matter all that much. But every one of those mirrors is reflecting back to you something. And for me, when you figure out your trends at 38, what you all of a sudden realize is you're standing in a field surrounded by a bunch of mirrors that are reflecting back a version of you that you now know is not authentic. And it feels crushingly difficult to say, I need to go change my reflection in every one of them. And oh, there's that big mirror. That's my mom. And this other one's my dad. Oh my God, the biggest one of all is my wife. What am I going to say to her? But like, what about all the mirrors of all the friends I made in high school and college and business school and professionally, my persona and my link? Like, it's like this immense kind of dread, because if nothing else it feels like effort. Like if it was nothing else, there was no politicians railing against or if you understood it even yourself, which I like, you had a great insight. It's like I realized I was trans. I'm like, okay, what does that actually mean? First of all, it's just it's a big thing, and it's so for me there was a lot of dread, and the time period between when I work at this company, Joon. We focus on mental health of teens and young adults now. And one of the things I like to bring from my own lived experience is I think there's a big difference between knowing and accepting. I think that's true of a lot of things we process in life. A lot of times we know something is true and we've yet to accept it. So when I came home from that walk, I knew I was trans unequivocally.
Wow.
I had not accepted it. And there was a
And how
period
did
of
you
time
tell Gabby?
I didn't. But Gabby eventually, there was enough going on that she's like, "What is up?" And she basically, I think unfairly to her, had to drag me out of the closet. And that was a very, very difficult, very emotional conversation. Um, but yeah, there was this big period where I was like, because knowing it and then living it are different things. And what is living it? What are like, what's the playbook? You don't know, right? And who is I going to talk to about that? You
Is there,
don't.
I mean, I know there's not a playbook, but are there like therapists who specialize? I mean, we're going to get into June. It's like maybe perfect transition to June, but like who did kind of help guide
Well, I
you? And
think I think
it sounds like you had a great experience, generally speaking. Like your friends accept you, your family accepts you, your wife accepts you. Like, what was your playbook?
Well, I messed it up. I mean, I did a bunch of things that were pretty unfair to Gabby in terms of like hiding things and trying to. Here's where my head was. Let me try some stuff. and like see if it's true. Because I wanted it
Mhm.
to not be true because
It's
it felt
easier
to
for
me
it not
like
to be true.
exactly. And I cared tremendously about the people around me, so I didn't want to go blow up my life, right? But like that is like, okay, I shaved my foot. How did that feel, right? And like those are the small things that Gabby started noticing. So she when we had that conversation, what became clear at that moment was it would be useful for other people to be involved in sort of helping me think through this and maybe us think through this. And so that's where we sought therapy really for the first time in my life. Um, I mean, you have to remember my parents were from families of immigrant, like therapy, like for Italians, like there weren't emotions amongst men, right? Like therapy, like, suck it up. Like it
Yeah,
just
figure
wasn't
it
a
out.
thing. Yeah. So it wasn't part of my life up until then. So yeah, I eventually connected to and found a therapist who's a cis, meaning sort of not trans woman. And I think she did what therapists do well, which is she didn't prescribe me as anything. She just gave me space and a framework for me to work through who I am in my own words and in my own way and on my own time. And then to do it in a way that was considered of those around me, considered of myself. That's an important thing you have to learn. You deserve to be considerate of yourself, if that makes sense, and also those around you. And so, Gabby and I began this journey, for lack of a better word, of trying to figure out what this meant for us. And we had a couples therapist, and I had a therapist. I think Gabby eventually had one, who supported us along the way. And then, eventually a therapist says to you, well, do you know other trans people? And I was like, I don't know any other trans people particularly well. She's like, well, you should probably fix that. And I didn't like, I really did not want to go to a support group with like metal chairs and cold coffee in a high school gym in the morning or evening after work. Right. And fortunately there was a person at work at the job I was currently at that, like, I don't know, figured it out and probably shouldn't have, but like put me in a meet, was like, are you trans? And I'm like, oh. And that person invited me to a Discord group, which was a bunch of 30 something year old, gender nonconforming or trans people who are generally in tech on the West Coast. And there's probably about 20 or 30 people in that Discord group. And the way I now talk about that group as it related to sort of my journey and my transition was they became my cheer squad, like in my pocket at all times. And the value of what that group was to me was like when I would look in the mirror and see something I hated and I would share that with them, they didn't go, oh, it'll be okay. They're like, yep, totally understand what that feels like. And that's what I needed to hear. Not that it's going to be okay. I needed to hear, like, this is part of the experience. Well, I felt that too. This is how it's made me feel. And then other
Mm.
times when you see yourself in a way and you're like, kind of have this euphoric gender moment and you want to share it with somebody, you can share it with them and they can be like, yes, I know how deeply amazing that felt. And there's like having that group with that level of understanding was a total game changer for me because we were very different people, to be clear. But we had lived through an experience that gave us insight into where each other were, and we were able to support each other simply by like existing, if that makes sense.
A hundred
And
percent makes sense.
so that was big. I have this idea now, June, maybe one day we'll build something like this, but that everybody deserves a cheer squad in their pocket. And I don't think it should be your family. I don't think it should be your close friends. I like this idea of people who are a little outside of your everyday life because that's the place where you're not judged. It feels a little bit more accessible, maybe a little bit more anonymous in the way that you can be experimental or whatever, but like also it broadens the horizons for which you're able to sort of contextually bring your life, not just to the
Yeah,
bubble you've built around you. So
I
cheer
agree.
squad, therapist, they all helped me find the energy to constructively start to change the mirrors and the reflection that was coming back. And some of that was so scary and so hard. And like I have, my relationship with my family and friends different now. And some still, I mean, you know, you often hear sometimes spouses of trans people often talk about them losing their husband or wife.
Like
Like
mourning
and
the death of that
more
person.
like sometimes they actually run faux funerals.
Yeah,
And like I used to kind of belittle that, but now that I'm through to the other side, there is loss. Gabby lost her husband on
yeah.
that day. And so we've had to figure out how to proactively manage that. And you never know what your relationship holds in the future, but we're stronger now than we were before in our ability to be a couple. I think And I'm so grateful that she stuck around because I, without judgment, would have totally understood if she's like, peace, I'm out.
Yeah.
Um,
I didn't
and we
know
have two
you
beautiful
before
children
you
now.
transitioned. I met you as Emily, but you're a phenomenal human being, and I would imagine a hard person to walk away from.
Well,
And you guys are, it sounds like your values are aligned, very
I think
much.
we I think we found that, and there's so much to it. But we also need to acknowledge that there are things that we've both lost, and I think that's the space we try to live in and be honest about. And um, look, life is. I think when you make a commitment to somebody as it relates to like marriage, the thing you're committing to is to go through a bunch of changes with another human. That's going to happen as you age, as careers change, as you have like have kids. That changes everything, right? That's the commitment. Whereas if
Yeah,
you're just dating, you could break up for whatever. It's
yeah,
when you're married, basically to me, the commitment was always you're going to try to get through the hard stuff. You're going to give it a shot. And sometimes it's not worth getting through, but other times it is. And I think we found enough of that shared overlap. That we value each other so deeply that we have enough to stay together, but also understand and give each other space to seek the things that we can no longer provide to one another. So it's complicated for sure. And
yeah.
I wish like
It's
my
impressive. I mean, for both of you, it's super. So were you at June
I was
when
at
you
Nerdy, so I
transitioned?
was before it was like, and the other thing is happened during COVID. So I was like stuck in a like
Oh,
this, like I wasn't even
yeah,
seeing people.
on Zoom.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so it's I mean, I've been out for like about 3 years, not all that long. But yeah, I got very lucky. The people around me didn't kick me out of the house or stop being friends with me. I had investors in June who were willing to see me as a CEO and not be worried about that. And I feel deeply grateful. And that's like a decent quick transition. When I transitioned myself and I didn't lose family and like I had a job, I had a family. I was on the extreme end of privilege for trans people. And it's terrible that that's the bar, but it is. And I was like, I got to give back. And so I started looking around. It became really quickly obvious to me that while all trans people could use support, and of course they're not the only group in the world that could use support, that trans youth especially were having a challenging time. And I saw metrics about, you know, 1 out of 4, so actually a little bit more than that, trans youth have attempted suicide in the last year. And that was the one that when I saw, I literally couldn't believe it. 1 out of 4 kids have tried to take their life. Then I heard some more metrics about, and trigger warning for those that want to skip over the next 30 seconds, but the violence with which these suicide attempts were having was increasing. There's sort of a comfortable way where you just kind of fade it out, and then there's ones where you really hurt yourself. And the version of that was increasing. And that was a reflection of us as a society teaching these kids that they're monsters and then being so unable to avoid that they believe that they're monsters and that it hurts them so deeply that they hurt themselves so violently. And I was like, this. So I started like the Trevor Project. I was doing things and trying to help, and then I found out about June, and I was like, wait a second. The opportunity here is to work at a company whose mission is to provide medium and high acuity mental health care to teenagers and young adults. So I could pour my professional life into this problem. It was like all
You
of a
were like,
sudden
where
my
do I
personal,
sign? Yeah.
yeah, like I had resigned to like I'm never going to go work on the thing that I'm deeply passionate about because I didn't know what it was, and I was fine with it. I loved working on grocery stores and ebooks and whatever else because they were all interesting problems. I didn't care much about them, except for the problems were fun. I cared about that. Now all of a sudden, my personal lived experience and my professional life had a chance to
Yeah.
intersect. And so every day I wake up and it is a hard job. And we can talk about why, but it feels like a gift, a genuine gift
It's
to be
such a
able to
gift.
feel. Yeah. So
So what is the business model? Tell us exactly, you kind of breezed over like what June does and who it serves. You kind of talked about that, but what is the business model? And I have so many questions.
yeah. Well, really
Yeah.
quickly, it's a difficult time to be a teen. So we touched upon earlier about my childhood being like a phoneless childhood or an internetless childhood. There's a lot of evidence that around 2011 and 2012, when phones became ubiquitous, a lot changed with basically childhood and kids. And we see this showing up in the data. Basically, starting around then, this really disastrous trend around the degradation of mental health amongst teens and young adults across the whole country and in fact world started to happen. And traditional predictors of poor mental health like parental abuse or bullying or substance abuse or poverty, they were all either flat on a rate basis or declining. There were two things that are correlated with this degradation. One is time spent online, and two was adolescent homicide, basically gun violence in schools. And in my opinion, those two things were intersecting. Like the threat of adolescent homicide or gun violence is greatly exasperated by watching it happen nearly live on your social platforms. So, even if it's not happening in your school, kids are seeing bloody footprints and hand marks before any of us are on CNN, before it's getting filtered. And so what we've done is the amplitude and frequency of stressors we are beaming straight into our kids' heads has increased by many orders of magnitude from where it was for us. And they're not equipped to process those things. I'm not a clinician, I'm not a therapist, but my layperson's view of what mental health is about agency. When we feel like we have agency over our lives, generally our mental health is very positive. When we feel lack of agency or complete inagency in our lives, I think that's where things like anxiety and depression start and snowball into self-harm or
Mm,
disordered eating. And so being a teen is fundamentally about the transference of a zero agency childhood into an adulthood, a time where you're supposed to happen to the world, not it happen to you. And
mm,
for a lot of teens, that's not the experience that they have anymore. Instead, what they have is this blast of information that's hitting them for which they have very little agency over because nobody's taught them how to process it. So, 3 out of 5 girls in the United States feel persistent feelings of hopelessness. Not Black girls, not trans girls, not girls who are poor. 3 out of 5 girls are feeling persistent feelings of hopelessness. And I don't know this to be causal, but it's definitely correlative that girls spend a bunch of time on the internet, right? And these services that they're on the internet are showing them versions of what it is to be a girl that are not real and not attainable. And they know it. They know they're filtered. They know there are moments in time which don't, but it doesn't matter because it never stops. And nobody has taught these girls how to see those images and happen to the images instead of the images happening to them. And the collective happening to them is destroying their mental health. And so what we enable at Joon is basically teaching of the skill set to start to have agency to what's happening to you in your life. We are not going to turn off the stressors. Now, I think we're going to look at social media and phones in schools and as kids as young as they are, like cigarettes and airplanes 20 years from now. We're going to say, what were we thinking? But I can't turn those off tomorrow. But what I can do is I can work to help equip kids so that when they see that image that makes them feel like their body makes them sad or is ugly or is disgusting, they, instead of having that feeling sink in, they can say, oh, I'm going to happen to it. I'm going to do whatever I need to do in this moment. I'm going to put my feet on the ground and my arms on the chair, and I'm going to get reconnected, and I'm going to realize this isn't real. I'm going to turn this off. And when we give them that little dose of agency to happen to the things that have previously been happening to them, it feels amazing. Agency feels great.
mm.
And we as adults know that. And so what Joon fundamentally did was take a framework of providing agency for which there's decades of evidence in how to do CBT, DBT, and we put it paradoxically on the phone. And the reason we did that is because the key unlock to therapy amongst teens and young adults is getting them to therapy. It's hard to get a teen to show up to anything reliably. Nevertheless, a thing where they have to be vulnerable to an adult on the adult's turf, and getting there requires them to get in their parents' car, and then to do that where they don't know how thick the walls are and their parents sitting in the lobby outside, and then get back in the car for the ride home where they'll probably be interrogated by their parent about what just happened. Or they just open their phone in their room, if they have the privilege to have their own room, surrounded by the things they know and love, or at least they know how thick the walls are, to start to taste those first doses of agency. And unsurprisingly, what we have found at Joon is teens show up to the ladder. And so, like, our follow-on rates are often well north of 90%, where the published data before it was often kids would follow on with therapy of 25 or 30% of the time. We are
That's
our
amazing.
symptom recovery from anxiety and depression is 2 to 4x published data on normal in-person therapy. So as it turns out, the
How are
virtual
you
modality
measuring it?
we
Like out of the
measure.
gate and then measuring it again?
So there's a standardized set of general screeners for things like anxiety and depression. So we use those just like everybody else does at ingestion, so intake when they come to us. And then we measure their sort of symptom level over time. And so the measurement I just described was at 12 to 16 weeks. The measurement then is how many who showed up with a clinical or severe level of anxiety or depression have gotten to a subclinical level. So if you were at clinical, you went one notch down. If you were at severe, you went two notches down. And the rough way to think about that is if you're at a clinical or severe level of anxiety or depression or whatever, it's impacting your life. If you're at
Yeah.
subclinical, it
You're
doesn't mean it's
avoiding
gone
doing certain things. Yeah.
exactly. Like maybe the school said you can't come to school anymore. Or
Yeah.
you don't have something impactful is going on in your life. Whereas subclinical doesn't mean it went away. It's just not really a huge detriment to your life. Still want to work on it. And so that's how we're measuring. So we're 2 to 4x improvement on clinical or severe levels to subclinical levels, so very manageable levels within 3 to 4 months of being on the platform, primarily driven by two things: showing up, like I just described, and then also taking the therapy environment, which before this was a total black box. Like, kid goes in a room with adult, who's to say if it's going well? Like, the kid could be like, I like this person, but they're not an expert at evaluating the clinician, nor is the clinician an expert in understanding. So when we put it in a virtual setting, the kids are on the phone. We actually don't allow the clinicians to be on a phone. We have them on desktop because we surround the video pane with a bunch of data about where that kid is right now. What has their journaling or their surveying on the surveys I just mentioned? What skills have they practiced this week, or did you assign to them? So and then we bring the best of CBT or DBT, whatever the evidence-based approach that we think is most relevant to that kid, right to that clinician's fingertips. So what we can do is we can normalize the output of the clinician by giving them all the ammunition they need to deliver a world-class therapy experience personalized for that kid. And because the app is also on a phone, we can engage the kid with skill-based practice, for instance, in between sessions, so that when they show up to the session, it's not like, oh, what did we talk about last week? It's like, I've been working on this all week. Like, I'd love to tell it. And so that whole system has made it effective and made it fun. And it gives this thing which is fundamentally addictive to any human, which is the sense of agency and accomplishment. I'm now happening to the world a little bit more than it's happening to me. And that is so unbelievably important for teens because of A, what we've unfairly strapped them with, which is these stressors, but B, neurologically, developmentally, your brain is as neurally plastic as it will be any other time in your life. The only time that comes close is 0 to 2 years old. And
Mm.
so our brain is the biggest caloric consumer of our body. It consumes the most energy. And so what it has evolved to do over time is it's evolved to build heuristics. So when we come across everyday scenarios, we don't have to like process it. We react. We teach ourselves a shortcut to like, how do I react to this very common situation? So I burn fewer calories trying to address it. And the neuroplasticity, basically the framework your brain is burning in your teens, carries into adulthood. And if the way you deal with stress, for instance, or a
Mm.
stressor is being anxious or being depressed or self-harming or self-medicating, substance abuse, guess what gets burned in as the shortcut into adulthood? That. If you
It was
burn in
fascinating.
health, yeah, so it's fixable in adulthood, but harder. And so the gift we can give, like this, the problem with mental health is everybody views it as, hey, I'm broken. I need to go get fixed. I need to talk to a psychiatrist. Oh, do I need to go to the hospital for crazy people? When I realized I was trans, for a long time I thought, am I broken? Is my brain abnormal? Like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Was the thought in my head. This isn't
Hmm.
normal.
Yeah.
And and so I think a big part of getting over mental health is realizing is a lot more like you. We're actually not as unique as we think we are, which is kind of a mean
Yeah.
thing to say, but also kind of a really like, once you realize that, it kind of opens the world to you in ways that you may not have felt before.
What
Um,
do you think as far as the contribution of like the kids being at home during the pandemic? Like, what did that contribute to this epidemic?
not nothing like immaterial. So to say, it definitely had an impact on them, for sure. The trend lines started well before and have continued since COVID. COVID, there's some blips because it was a difficult time for social
Hmm.
development and a bunch of other things, but it's really, really, really critical for parents and other people to realize the degradation in mental health is not COVID driven and has not gone away when COVID quote
And
unquote
so
ended.
what advice would you have? I know you're saying like I'm not a clinician, but like you're in this field. What advice would you have for parents? I mean, obviously monitoring the amount of time online, what they're logging into, Or is it just like I've tried to be like, you can't be on it at all, but it's like, well, that's how we communicate. That's how I'm in touch with my friends. And it's constant.
Well, Dr. Amy Mazulis, who is one of the co-founders of Joon, and is just a brilliant human being. She has two teenage daughters. She's dealt with hard things in her life. She's dedicated her career to studying this and helped co-found and build the clinical model for Joon. I heard her give a piece of advice once, which I think is really helpful, and that is if you're going to take something away for your kids, you have to replace it with something else. Like, if you say no phone or no PlayStation or whatever it is, it has to come with something to fill in, or else it's not going to work. I just always thought that was like a really, I'm not saying it's easy to figure out what that is,
It's
but I
so
agree with
hard.
you. We've put social media in the middle of assignments from teachers and
Oh, it's
projects,
crazy. It's
communications,
crazy.
sports teams. So I think you're on the real core thing here, which is if you accept pragmatically that the world is going to be the way it is for some period of time, and you're willing to accept that that's different than how we grew up and potentially difficult for teens to navigate, then you should also be willing to accept as a parent that it's a tough time to be a parent, and that's okay.
Yeah.
One of the big
Very
problems
good
we
point.
have
Thank you for
is that,
saying that.
yeah, like it's a lot of parents, like one of the objections to therapy is like, do we really need this? One of the really interesting fundamental characteristics of teens and young adults who have mental health need is that their acuity fluctuates wildly. Like there are days and weeks that will go by and everything seems fine. And then there's suicidality. It is a feature of teens that there is that fluctuation in acuity. And I worked at a tutoring business before this, a virtual tutoring business. If your kid is behind at school or ahead at school, even, there is grades and parent teacher conferences and standardized tests and whether they get to the next grade. You as a parent can ignore the signs, but there is screaming evidence that there is need. No such thing exists in mental health. So parents are basically trying to find their way from point A to point B in the dark with no GPS, and it's probably a rocky, scary terrain they're kind of, so it's, and the acuity, like it's so hard to be a parent today.
It
And
really is.
and
And
that
what are you finding? Oh, guys, keep going.
no,
Sorry.
ask the questions.
Well,
You
I'm just curious, like what are you finding is proving to be the most successful as far as frequency of the appointments, the modality? Is it DBT? Is it cognitive behavioral therapy? Is it meditation? I saw it on your website. What I love about your website about June is it's very digestible. It's not all this like mumbo jumbo. It's like, oh, you're having a panic attack? Here, click on here. And it's like boom, boom, boom. Or, oh, you're having a catastrophic, doom and gloom. This is how
know,
to think about that. And I've been around all of this. And so it really resonates.
I
Just how easy it is. My big thing as a mom, or even as somebody who's been in therapy, is like the fit of the therapist. Like these are all we know this like 30,000 foot conversation that we're having, but like down to the details, like how do you find the therapist? How often should they go? Where do you start as far as the modality?
um lots, I love those questions. And by the way, if you put yourself in the place of a parent who doesn't have experience with therapy, and those questions feel even more inaccessible and more difficult to
Right,
digest and think
right.
through and harder to climb over. And by the way, you're probably already emotionally exhausted because things are a little bit difficult. Like it's very, very hard. But the vast majority of our clients are on once a week appointments. Whether it's CBT or DBT or whatever evidence-based approach is really client dependent. So all of our clients go through an intake with a therapist. If in that intake, so basically that there's a big intake process, the therapist looks at it and they say, hey, here's how I think I can help. This is the approach we'd start with. If there's not a match there, we rematch. There almost always is. And then they execute on that plan. And as things change, they evolve the care model. And one of the beautiful things about June is from the clinician perspective, we have a bunch of CE stuff that we do, continuing education stuff that we do. We do consult groups. We make it all free of charge. A lot of these things cost money for therapists. So we help them navigate being a therapist as well, which is super cool. What like
Interesting. And what
one of
about
the more
notifications? Do you do any of that? Like where I'd get a notification, don't forget to breathe, or,
we
like,
haven't done sort of those we notify about like appointments and
yeah,
assignments
yeah.
and those sorts of things. No, there's a great company called Take 2 Minutes, which also does something very similar to that. I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there. Uh I guess on that front, um I I think this is the most, so I think the way the therapy is delivered, as long as the kid shows up, is I think that's actually a fairly figured out problem. What we're working on right now is, if you're a member of a really marginalized or scared community, like trans kids in Texas, for instance, how do
Oh, jeez.
I trust a therapist? Like, how do I know the therapist is not going to cause harm because they don't understand, even if they're well-meaning, they may misgender or say something that causes trauma to my kid. Like, how do I so, a lot of that match stuff that you're talking about, we're working to make sure we feel families and parents and the kids themselves feel really confident around.
Hmm.
But I think the opportunity in mental health is upstream. It's about engaging with mental health in the first.
Oh, it is endless. Like this is, I meet with companies all day, every day. And I told you, like the minute I met you, I was like, this just hits so close to home because, if the kids have had therapists and it's like, well, they're not a fit, not because they're not a good therapist, but because, the way they speak to my child is not hitting right. Like, okay, sweetie, like that doesn't work for certain kids. And other kids need to be asked a lot of questions and not just like agreed with. There's so many different ways to
There,
have the
there
fit.
are. And
So
so
is
one of the
that
great
part
things
of the
about
intake also?
Yeah, it is. And one of the great things about virtual is we're not bound by geography as it relates to matching you with a therapist. So,
Yeah.
there are state licensure requirements, but basically, if there's a therapist in Washington State or California or Texas, like, then we can match you with that person. And I think when you remove the geographical constraint of I have to be able to drive to this person once a week or whatever, or you greatly increase the chance that you can be connected to somebody who will work well with
Yeah.
you.
And
But
you greatly increase the odds that the parents are going to be into it because with a working mom with three kids, I'm like, oh yeah, of course you can jump on June versus
it's
like,
way,
oh, it's such a pain
but
in the
we,
ass.
we should in business we should never underestimate the power of making something frictionless.
Oh,
Like it always
totally.
seems stupid, and then you do the experiment and you're like, well, it worked. It always works.
Yeah.
People want less
Yeah.
friction, not more. And like
Yeah.
mom, stereotypically mom in America is a very hard job. Like there's no time. The thing you have the least of is time. The way I like to think about parents in our business and us talking to them is I say to my team all the time, I think basic so I should step back. We serve teens and young adults. We serve up to 26, but the vast majority of our audience are teenagers. It is almost always true that parents are involved because therapy has costs to it. There's human on the other side who's deeply skilled and actually deserves a tremendous amount, like teachers. And so it's either through insurance or direct pay. Kids can't do that on their own, so the parents get involved. So parents are a fundamental part of this relationship, and so we have to be respectful and think a lot about that. And so we get kid leads convert 1/10 of the rate that parent leads convert for us, because asking a kid who has a mental health need to then go convince their parents that therapy is the right thing is a bridge too far. But if there's a parent who shows up ready to do it or wanting to do it or curious, and their kid is maybe somewhat skeptical, what we have found is June's so awesome. Once the kid does it once or twice, they're like, I love getting this agency, and they'll continue on. So parents are critical to us. And you called out something super important a moment ago, which is one of the things we have to recognize about therapy for teens is that it is by definition asymmetric. Like there's no teen therapists. There's no you don't have a graduate degree and all the training. Like I'm a 14-year-old, 15-year-old. I can't sit down with another trained 14 or 15-year-old who has a license. I'm sitting down with an adult. So there's immediately a power dynamic and asymmetry that exists in that, which is different than an adult seeking therapy. So you're totally
Totally.
right. Like I hear you, sweetie. Like you can imagine that type of thing happening from an adult to a kid. And so it is a very delicate relationship. Very delicate
Mm.
relationship.
Hmm.
One of the things I love
Totally.
about virtual therapy is if there's something harmful happening, asking a kid to like get up out of a physical space and walk out is very different than a kid hanging up the session. Like we want to
Hmm.
give kids agency in how they feel and how they interact. And so in some ways we're doing that with this. So but at the end of the day, the parent is critical. And so the thing where this all started was I like to think about moms as basically thinking in their head, what about me? Like what about me? $500 a month for my kid to get therapy? Like maybe I know they need it, and maybe, but like, what about me? Could I maybe I want a therapist, or like, could I get a massage, or could I like literally just have 4 minutes of free time? What about me? And I actually think that parenting, teenagers especially, is a low agency moment for a lot of parents. You
Mm.
don't feel like you control the kids anymore. It feels like life's happening to you. And unsurprisingly, just like it does for the kids, that's not a great feeling.
Yeah.
And so, how do we talk about mental health with parents who feel that way? A lot of them bubble that up as I did a bad job or I failed or I'm embarrassed to talk to my friends because my kid won't even talk to me or my kid says F you
Right.
to me. Like, and
Yeah.
so now they're not talking to anybody. They have no GPS or map. It's just like this combination of things that make it very hard to engage. So what we have to acknowledge at June, and I think across healthcare, but mental health certainly, is that when we engage people with this, we have to understand the tenderness of the moment and the default state, which is no, there's too much already, or I don't really, or is this going to work? Because it's not a cast that comes off in 6 weeks. Like, there's a lot that you have to buy into here. And I think that is our challenge and opportunities. How do we build trust? How do we hold space for the parent experience? How do we invest in the parent experience? And to me, this comes all the way back to what I experienced with the difference between knowing and accepting. I think a lot of parents know there may be a mental health need with their kids, but they don't really know what it means to accept that and to seek
Hmm.
the thing that will empower that kid. Because, and this is a really interesting insight we have found, when we say words like, is your kid disorganized or unmotivated or mean, all kinds of responses. If we use the words anxiety, depression, self harming, the group thins down real quick. A lot of parents don't want a kid labeled as anxious or depressed
Totally.
or eating
Totally.
disordered. Is that going to go on their record? Who's going to know
Yeah.
about that? Will colleges see that? What's going to happen? Where does that show up? Does it go on the school? Like, does it high school or middle? So it's
Yeah.
we're there's this very thin space. Like, why are kids disorganized or unmotivated or mean? Like, it's because of these core underlying issues, right? That so
Mm.
there's this thin but stubborn wall between where mental health sits and where need is being talked about. And and so June's fundamental opportunity is how do we help folks scale that wall in a way that feels accessible and comfortable to them? And
Yeah.
until we do, it'll be mental health will remain a privilege, basically, for kids whose parents have been brave enough and supportive enough to embrace it. And sadly, it's not enough.
It is not
Um,
enough. And so for you and for June, like what does success look like? Is it like, hey, now people know about us, it's converting, people are sticking with it, we're in a bunch of different states.
Well, step
Um,
one for us was make sure that the environment works. Like that, all of our focus and thank you to Amy and Katie and others on our team who are so heads down focused on this was we're gonna try to put something on a phone and like if it causes harm, we're out. This isn't like building a grocery store, right?
yeah.
Like we screw
Yeah, it's
stuff up at
people's
Amazon, we
mental
ship
health. Yeah.
yeah, this is like
The stakes are
the bar here
high.
everywhere is
Yeah.
high. So that was thing number one. Once we got the clinical data that said it's working, and actually it's working extraordinarily well, the next thing we really had to figure out was how do we get the cost of it down? So we use those results to say, hey, insurance companies, like it's worth working with us at these negotiated rates so that your members can have access to this care. So it's not just for people who can pay out of pocket. And so that was last year for us as we signed up a number of insurance plans and we effectively made the care now accessible to their populations in a way that it was more accessible than before. We've also added places like the city of Seattle who have given us grant dollars to serve members of their community who are lower middle class. We have grant programs who are providing cost offset for families who qualify. We're working with a bunch of other cities and government organizations, but what does success look like? The more cost subsidy I can bring to the table, the better. I want everybody who deserves access to have access to this care. So that's a big input to us. And then, so cost is a big, so quality, cost, and then the final part of the component is the part we were just talking about, which is if the cost objection is handled and the thing really works, how do I get people to know about it and trust it? And the deeper you go into underrepresented, underserved, marginalized communities, the more scar tissue there is from people who have promised them things and not delivered. And so, what we're really focused on now at June is how we present ourselves to those communities in the most authentic and trustworthy way we possibly can. And from my perspective, the only way to do that is to make sure there are people working at June who've lived those experiences and who have been in those communities. So, I'm really thinking about it a little like we thought about categories in Amazon. We have books and CDs and DVDs and
And how
sporting
many
goods.
people
Like
do you guys have now? How many employees?
20, we're in the 20s, so a pretty small
Yeah.
team. And towards a corporate staff we have many more clinicians,
In
but in
yeah, in the
corporate
field
staff it's
working.
still pretty
Yeah.
small.
Wow. So fascinating. There's so much more to discuss.
Yeah.
My final question for you, I've got lots of others and we might have to do a 2.0, but is what fuels you?
Somewhere along my journey, I had people like Heidi who introduced us, who invested in me and believed in me through the messiness, as you and I have talked about in the past. Everything feels like a mess and chaos. And my parents did that too, my grandparents. I had that in my life. And I've, without a doubt, in in a place would not have been able to achieve on my own. And at some point, I got to a position where I can be that to others. And so, what I say to folks and what fuels me is I don't think I'm going to. And to my investors, I'm sorry. This is true, but probably not the greatest thing. 10 years from now, I don't think I'm going to remember P&Ls and margins and balance sheets and updates to them. But what I will remember is watching the team around me both lift sort of themselves and me and watch us accomplish things that I don't think we would have on our own. And uh, there is like an intense joy in seeing people accomplish things that they didn't think that they could or were skeptical of or whatever. We are well over three-quarters women at June, not by any particular design, just sort of how it's ended up. And one thing I've lived both sides of this now is women are under leveled like almost universally. And so what I'm trying to build at June is a culture where we trust by default, but we have to maintain the trust instead of having to earn it at start. Because when somebody shows up and I say, I believe in you, I trust that you can do this, and they go, I don't know, I don't think so. That's an output of where they've been, where a bunch of people have basically said, I don't believe that you're gonna do this. You're gonna go on maternity leave, or you're gonna whatever, or you can't like when you say I trust you, I believe in you, and then they go do it and go, whoa, then you verify and you continue it. Like you can't just trust infinitely for no reason. But man, the joy in seeing that is fed right back into me because it lifts me.
I love that.
And that is what fuels me. And then I have this unique gift, which is that if we do that well, we're going to impact a bunch of lives in a way that actually is going to be really meaningful for those lives. This is unfortunately the first business where I've never been able to like prod into the product. Like it's a very private space and we take it so seriously. I don't see any data about like a particular session or client. I don't know any of their names. It's weird as the CEO of a company not to have that. But I know based upon the outcome data and the testimonials we get, the impact we're having on lives. So if I can bring that joy to each other, we can lift each other as coworkers, as humans. If we can find our individual brilliance, I then get to filter it into this cause, which feels so deeply important to me personally. And we don't just serve trans kids, we serve any kids. So that's what fuels me.
Thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. If you'd like to check out past episodes to hear from more business leaders, go to fueltalent.com/podcast. And if you have a minute, please leave a review and rating on your favorite podcast app, or share this episode with a friend or colleague. Please share any feedback or interview suggestions for other guests by sending a message to podcast@fueltalent.com. I'm Shauna Swerland, and thanks again for listening.